I want to read some things and then I'll comment on them. And I developed a course, and I entitled the course The Heart of a Vaishnava. And the subtitle is Exploring the Power of Humility and Honesty, or Self-Honesty. Because humility requires some self-honesty in the sense of being real about what challenges we have as devotees. And sometimes it's hard to look at oneself in a way that others look at oneself. We tend to have our image of ourselves, and we may be afraid to be too objective, because if we're too objective, perhaps the image that we have of ourselves will be dissolved, cracked, minimized, shut down. And we all like to think of ourselves as good people, but we do have our faults, and it's okay to have faults. Everyone does. And the idea of exploring self-honesty is not to become depressed about the faults, but to become aware of them, and especially to become aware of our motives in relation to pride. Because pride is probably one of the most difficult things to deal with, and one of the things that separates us from Krishna so much. And I joke with the devotees, I say that when you are going back to Godhead, and you will go on the Vaikuntha airplane, but before you go on the Vaikuntha airplane, they're going to check your bags. Security check, right? Because there's certain things you can't take to Vaikuntha. And if you have any pride in your bag, they're not going to let you in. You'll have to take it out of your bag. So we could say that these classes now are helping us remove all the pride that might slip into our carry-on, because you can't take that with you. And actually, there is transcendental pride, but material pride we can't take, but transcendental pride we can. So, what is my qualification for teaching this course on humility? I don't think I have any. I don't think I really understand what humility is, but Krishna, by his infinite mercy, has given me a glimpse of it by giving me the association of devotees who are humble. And hopefully a drop has worn off on me, and if it has, then I can speak something. Anyway, I'm going to try. Maybe Krishna will help me. But it is probably the most difficult topic to speak about, because when we speak, we require realization. And false ego is so strong, and pride is so powerful. The desire to be acknowledged and honored is so great that it seems that humility tends to evade us. So then you might say, well, why would you give a class on humility if you don't feel you can honestly understand it and speak about it? Well, what I'm hoping that will happen is that because humility is very broad and there are many, many aspects to it, if through this class we can each get a little insight or a little desire to be more humble, or understand ways in which we could be more humble, understand ways in which we're not being as humble as we should be, if we can get a little something, then it's worth it. If we can see how in a relationship with a god brother or a spouse or a spiritual master or a junior, we're not being humble, then if we can just get that, that's good. If we can see somehow where our motives are not being pure, where we're motivated by desire to be honored, we can get a little glimpse into that. If we can see how humility relates to envy, how it relates to fault-finding, if we get some insight that would prevent us or minimize our tendency to fault-find, or prevent or minimize some of the envy that's in our heart, then I think we're successful. That's progress. And I don't have big hopes that we're all going to become more humble than a blade of grass, because that won't happen until we're very advanced in Krishna consciousness. But what we can hope to do is practice more humility even before it manifests. But practice it because that practice is how it will manifest. So, for example, you might realize that being critical or judgmental or being envious is due to pride. But the pride is very strong within your heart. But if you understand that these anarthas are due to pride, you can act to control that, knowing that Krishna doesn't like devotees who are proud. So the pride may still be there, but at least there's some stronger desire to overcome it. So that's what we can hope for. Some realization that Krishna gives us how he's not happy with us when we're proud. Perhaps some realization that we don't need to be proud, because sometimes we think we need to show off to be accepted. So if we can realize that we don't have to show off to be accepted, we don't even have to try to be accepted, we just have to try to be sincere devotees and honest about our faults, and that's okay, and it's okay to be fallen, then I think that will be a great achievement. Because a lot of pride is not just a spiritual disease, it's also sometimes a material disease, where people feel that they have to show off to be happy, or they have to show off to feel confident, or they have to show off to become accepted by other people or accepted in a group, or maybe they feel pressure within an organization to live up to certain ideals, so they want to pretend. So these are unhealthy psychological aspects of pride, which in some way are distinct from the spiritual disease, because some of these unhealthy psychological aspects are easier to deal with than the deep-rooted envy of Krishna that causes pride, or the desire to be like Krishna. Of course, you can say that the psychological aspects are manifestations of that, but in some cases everything's a manifestation of our envy of Krishna, our desire to be God. But in some manifestations of pride are due to just not being materially grounded. Now, another thing that's interesting is that Prabhupada said that when you're in passion, when you're in ignorance, that's when pride's going to come. When you come to goodness, there'll be more humility. So in looking at this problem, and in looking at many problems that we face in Krishna consciousness, a lot of it just boils down to not being in goodness, but being in passion or ignorance. Like anger, it's manifested mostly in ignorance. Resentment is a form of anger, so it's manifested mostly in ignorance. And so many of our bad qualities are really symptomatic of being in the lower modes of nature. So part of developing any kind of good quality is also, more than just in addition to talking about it and understanding it and practicing it, is being in the mode of goodness. Because higher qualities will tend to manifest in the mode of goodness. And then, of course, being Krishna conscious is when these qualities fully manifest. So the natural question comes up, and we discussed this in the Forgiveness Workshop, that if humility manifests in the mode of goodness, and it manifests fully in the stage of bhava and prema, then why do we need to discuss it now? Why can't we just practice our devotional service and wait for us to achieve higher levels of Krishna consciousness, to come to the mode of goodness, to come to anartha nivritti, and then allow humility to naturally manifest? And that is true. But it's important to note that to get to those higher stages, we have to curb our pride before it naturally goes away. And so what does that mean? Curb our pride means not allow it to get in the way, not allow it to interfere with our devotional service, and try not to allow pride to be a motivating factor. So what that means is that pride may be existing within us, but we don't want it to be something that's going to motivate our Krishna consciousness, or something that's going to pull us around. Do this, because if you do this, you'll be recognized. Or do this, because if you do this, everyone's going to say nice things about you and pat you on the back. So we don't want to live in that way, or be calculating how I can get advantages to be honored. So the desire is there, but as sadhakas, we want to practice in our actions, and as far as possible in our thinking, humility, following in the footsteps of these great devotees who manifest humility, who show us how to manifest it. And then even though it's there, at least we're not being overly controlled by it. So in this way, through the practice of humility, we're in an ideal situation to advance in Krishna consciousness. And because without humility, we can't advance. And so it seems like a catch-22. Well, I won't become humble until I'm pure, but without humility, I won't become pure. So they're both true. Because humility, at least on the level of practice, is necessary to become pure. And when you become pure, humility naturally develops. And so then we need to understand because we're talking about humility and talking about humility developing or humility as a practice, we need to understand what it is. And so I was studying the teachings of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati on the topic, and he speaks a lot about this. And his speaking about humility is contained within a specific theme. And the theme that he focuses on is that I am not better than others, but others are better than me. And then the ramifications of that is that I appreciate others and I don't criticize others. And then he goes on to say that we have this tendency to not see our own mistakes and not see our own faults, but to see others' faults. So he's explaining that that tendency comes from pride. And he said that unless we become humble through becoming aware of our own defects, we won't be able to appreciate devotees, because we'll always be seeing their defects, because we're not really so keen to see our own, or our consciousness isn't geared towards that kind of reflective state, but it tends to be more geared to seeing the faults of others, because the faults of others are easy to see. Our own faults are more difficult, so we'll tend to notice the faults of others, right? They're much more obvious than our own faults, and we're inclined to see the faults of others because it will boost our false ego. And we're not inclined to see the faults of ourselves because it will deflate our false ego. And really, if you think about material life is a process of inflating false ego, of kind of gathering attention, gathering importance to ourselves. Just like, you see in how people live, how they dress, the cars they drive, the homes they live in, how they decorate their homes, the jewelry they wear and so forth. It brings attention to that person. So we like to bring attention to ourselves through these things. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur is saying, if we like to bring attention to ourselves, because it's natural, but if after becoming devotees we still like that, then we will tend to be judgmental of other devotees. We'll tend to be critical when they don't follow all the principles as well as we would like them to follow. And then he said, in that state, we will not be able to appreciate devotees. So then we can conclude that anytime we're not appreciating devotees, it means pride has entered. And he explained this very elaborately and very clearly. And we, in our conditioned minds, we want to say, but what if there is a fault? But what if? And there is validity to the what ifs. But in the general instruction that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur gave, he didn't deal with the but ifs. Because the but ifs are normally the exceptions. He dealt in normal interaction with Vaishnavas. That a lot of what might be a but if is not really necessary. In management, in areas where a devotee's behavior is negatively impacting someone, okay, there may be some but ifs for certain devotees who have the position to deal with that. So there might be some but ifs. Okay, we have to deal with him. Spiritual master, he has to correct his disciples. A leader may have to correct someone. So that's there. But his general point is that if we're developing humility, genuine humility, there'll be a lot of appreciation for the service and the act and the consciousness of other devotees. And if we're not developing appreciation, if pride is influencing us sufficiently, then naturally, instead of appreciating, we're going to see what they're doing wrong, we're going to see what they're lacking, we're going to see how they're falling short, and we're going to become thereby critical. So he pointed out very clearly that criticism, generally, for the most part, is a manifestation of pride. And appreciation is a manifestation of humility. So that's just a barometer for us in our own life. So when we're becoming critical, we can tell ourselves, now this is pride, I'm being influenced by pride, which means mode of passion is overtaking me. And I'm being influenced by a demoniac nature, because in the Gita, when Krishna describes Daivi Sampat and Asuri. Asuri means demoniac and Daivi means godly. When he describes the godly qualities and the demoniac qualities, pride, conceit, that's demoniac. So that's why we as devotees, we want to monitor that, because it's not something that brings us closer to Krishna. Like there are certain qualities which we just know are bad. Like if you're very mean to people or you're hurtful, then it's obvious that is taking you away from Krishna. That's not Krishna consciousness. But somehow or other, with a quality like pride, it's much more subtle. We don't automatically respond and think, oh, I'm being proud. That's demoniac. It's a demoniac quality. Conceit, false ego is a demoniac quality. We don't, when we're hankering or looking for pride, or in some way our ego's becoming overly inflated, we don't always relate to it as this is wrong, this is separating me from Krishna, that Krishna doesn't like this is demoniac. We don't normally see it that way. And I think sometimes we don't even see it. We don't even notice it, because it's so integrated within our conditioned consciousness that it just normally acts. And therefore we're often not aware of it. It's coming out of us, but no red lights are going on. No alarms in our brain are going off. So to make this point a little more clear, so I'm kind of like summarizing the whole course now, and we'll go in more detail. But we see in Krishna's pastimes, in Mahaprabhu's pastimes, how attracted they are to devotees who manifest great humility. And conversely, how upset they are, or what's the word? Detached, not attracted to, unhappy with, distance from those who were proud. So when a devotee of Krishna becomes proud, then a lot of times you'll see Krishna will do something to curb their pride. Even in our life we see, even though Krishna may not be personally here, but we see often how he will do things to curb our pride. If we're becoming proud sometimes, he'll take something away from us, some ability that we had, and all of a sudden we're not as good at something as we used to be. And then we understand, I became proud, and Krishna's trying to humble me. He wants me to remember that whatever talent I have, it's coming from him. But specifically in the Bhagavatam and Chaitanya Charitamrita, you'll see whenever a devotee becomes proud, Krishna will do something to curb the pride of that devotee. And whenever a devotee manifests humility, then we'll see that Krishna is very pleased with that devotee. So I think one really, really important lesson about humility, in particularly in relation to asking the question, why should I practice humility? What's the reason? What benefit is there? Do I really have to be? Will Krishna not accept me if I'm not humble? What place does humility hold in bhakti? The most fundamental answer is that it's pleasing to Krishna. Krishna likes devotees that are humble. So that the more humble we become, the closer we get to Krishna, the more proud we become, the further we become from Krishna. So we say humility means you think yourself low. But the lower you think yourself, the closer you become to Krishna. So you try to think of an example. You say, Krishna's feet are on the ground, right? So you want shelter, Krishna's feet, and you also have to be down there. But if you have your head in the sky, very proud of yourself, no, but you approach Krishna through his feet. So now you've distanced yourself. So you could also realize this just by looking at any relationship in this world, because in this world, pride will destroy relationships. And just like we have the principle of guyati, akyati prichtati, revealing one's mind and confidence. And that's part of the bhakti. It's part of creating a good relationship. So any relationship requires honesty, a lack of pretense, a lack of trying to impress, but just being real. So it's the same in relation to Krishna, that he wants us to be real. He doesn't want us to be pretending. So Krishna likes humility. It's very attractive to him. So as devotees, then obviously we want to do things which are attractive to Krishna. We want to do things which are pleasing to Krishna. And so if we find out, as we're finding out now, that humility pleases Krishna, then we should understand there's a very strong impetus for us to practice it, even if it's painful, even if it's difficult, even if we find it extremely challenging to give honor to someone who we don't think is that worthy of honor. But that's the Vaishnava mentality. That's what you do. That's what you do when you're Krishna conscious. When you're Krishna conscious, it's not a struggle. It's just what you do. Right? But when you're in the practice of sadhana, you may not naturally do it. At least Vaidhi sadhana. And so sometimes it's a struggle. And so the impetus to do it is to always think, even though I may be envious of this devotee and I don't want to acknowledge the good in the devotee, even though I may have so many faults and I'm reluctant to acknowledge them, even though they're being pointed out by others, still it will please Krishna if I take the humble position, and I will get closer to Krishna. And of course, our life is to please Krishna. And our goal is to become pure devotees. And wherever there is purity, there's humility. And that's why you see in the poems and the songs and the writings and the prayers of all great devotees intense humility, because it naturally manifests where there's a high degree of devotion. So when we're pure devotees, it will manifest fully. But until we're pure devotees, we have to act it out, so to speak, fake it till you make it. Act through humility, and then, as we discussed in the forgiveness workshop, that through that action, it actually causes a change of heart. That what we do with the physical body causes a change of heart. And also, sometimes in order to act humbly, there has to be some shift internally just to be able to fake it. Sometimes you can't even fake it unless you make some internal shifting, to understand, well, what is the proper behavior now? What is the proper way of thinking? What should I do in this situation? My pride is being tested right now. I've been given a lot of honor, a lot of praise. How do I deal with this? What should I be feeling and thinking? Because I want to manifest, not false humility, I want to manifest genuine humility. So then you begin to contemplate how to enter more deeply into the right attitudes that one should have to maintain humility. So even though it's not spontaneous, even though it's not natural, it's necessary and it's purifying. So now I'm going to go and see if you have any questions before I can go further. Yeah, okay. So everybody's good. They're all in awe. Everyone's just silent. Anuradha is silent. Palik is silent. Savitri is silent. Maharani is silent. There's 2 Maharanis. Wow. I don't know if they're here. Catherine is silent, and the guest is silent. Okay, so I'll continue. That I take it as you want me to continue. So I wasn't looking at chat when I was talking because I was reading. I wanted to read something. So what I've just done is give you kind of a broad overview, very, very broad and general overview and summary. And now let's read some things, and then I can fill in a lot. I didn't tell you everything, but we can fill a lot in. Okay, so I'm going to read some things and we will discuss. This is a quote from Srila Prabhupada. The sign of our advancement is not in the position we have, but in how humble and tolerant we have become. Prabhupada said this. No, the reason he said that is because that sometimes we may not be practicing humility and tolerance enough, or we may not be manifesting humility and tolerance enough, but we may be successful in our service. And sometimes we think kind of like you can buy your relationship with Krishna just by accomplishing something. And I'm not in any way putting down accomplishing. We should accomplish much for Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada was so pleased when we accomplished the services that he's given us, the mission that he's given us. And so much mercy comes from that. But the point I'm making is that we shouldn't think that can replace the need for genuine humility. I think, I've done this service, so I'm advancing in Krishna consciousness. That's true, but advancing is holistic, so it's not just that you do a lot of service or you're enthusiastic, but there are other things that go with it. So therefore, Prabhupada's saying, the sign of our advancement is not in the position, but how humble and tolerant we've become. Okay, so maybe through your service you could achieve a very high position. And then you think, well, because I've achieved this position, that means I'm advanced. It doesn't mean you're advanced necessarily. It may mean you're advanced, but not necessarily. But aside from that, the goal of Krishna consciousness obviously is not to achieve a position. And so once having the position, one shouldn't think, well, I guess I've achieved the goal. I've become a temple president or a GBC, or I'm in charge of a project, or I've become a guru, I've become a sannyasi. I have a position, so that means I'm successful. It could mean that. It doesn't necessarily mean that. But Prabhupada's point is that really you know when you're advancing by the degree of humility and tolerance that's developing. So okay, on one hand we may do wonderful service, we may have good sadhana. On the other hand, we may be proud. So it's an incomplete equation. We may be intolerant, impatient. It's an incomplete equation. So Prabhupada's making the point here that the most essential barometer of spiritual advancement is how one is becoming humble and tolerant. So okay, you're doing good in so many areas, but if there's not sufficient humility and tolerance, then it's like, okay, I have so many vital signs that are healthy, but then you do my blood pressure and it's really high. Okay, so here's a problem. Your blood pressure is high, it could be dangerously high. Because if you have a heart attack, no matter if your kidneys and liver are healthy and your other organs are healthy and you're in tip-top shape and you run 10 miles a day, if you have a heart attack, then you're dead. Or you become seriously ill. So it's something like that. You could say, well, the service could be like a person running so many miles. But the pride, the humility and tolerance could be like the health of the heart. So if the heart's weak, then the whole body will become weak. So, here's another quote. Srila Prabhupada was ready to depart for Hong Kong and Tokyo. Relaxing in his room with a few disciples, he gave some last-minute instructions. Prabhupada told the devotees that in order to stay in Krishna consciousness, a devotee would have to become very tolerant. Quote, when you become a devotee, sometimes your dearest friends will become like your enemies. Unquote. He gave the example of Prahlad, whose nearest and dearest relative, his father, had tried to kill him. Therefore, Prabhupada concluded, we have to become more tolerant than a tree and more humble than a blade of grass. If we can just cultivate these two qualities, then we can advance in Krishna consciousness. So this is really interesting. If we can just cultivate these two qualities, then we can advance in Krishna consciousness. And it sounds like Prabhupada saying, without these qualities, we can't advance, that we'll be blocked from advancement. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said that in the practice of bhajan and executing Krishna consciousness, that patience and tolerance are our only friends. And Krishna describes in the Gita tolerating happiness, tolerating distress, heat and cold. So the reason is because without that tolerance, we become caught up in the dualities of life. And so, today you're happy, tomorrow you're not happy, today everything's good, tomorrow something happens, you can't tolerate it. So tolerance keeps one steady. And why is tolerance necessary? Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said, it's necessary because the nature of the world is turbulent. There's always upheavals. Things don't go right. It's not just somebody's going to tap into our false ego and we have to tolerate that, but just everything in this world is potentially disruptive. From little things to big things. It's just the nature of this world. So if we're too disturbed by things, we can't focus on Krishna consciousness, because when we become very disturbed, we focus on the disturbance, right? Yes? That's what we focus on. The disturbance. So if you're just focused on what disturbs you, then you can't meditate on Krishna. If you focus too much on what disturbs you, you won't even serve Krishna. So here, what is Prabhupada saying? He said, if we can just cultivate these two qualities, tolerance and humility, then we can advance in Krishna consciousness. So that's another way of saying the first sentence. Krishna advancement means you're becoming humble and tolerant. So it's kind of, you're looking at it from both ends. If you're advancing, you're becoming humble and tolerant. Unless you cultivate humility and tolerance, you can't become Krishna conscious. And then the third thing is that Krishna consciousness is humility. So if it is humility, if that's what it means, then you have to cultivate it. And then if we don't cultivate it, of course, Krishna, He's so merciful that even though we're proud, He lets us serve Him. That's His kindness, right? It's just He's very kind that He lets us serve Him. But pride is affecting the purity of our bhakti, and we want to do pure devotional service. And we want to learn how to become humble because humility is Krishna consciousness. It's kind of ironic. It's a paradox to be Krishna conscious and be proud. Doesn't make sense, does it? This devotee is very Krishna conscious. He's really proud. That doesn't make sense, does it? Doesn't make sense to me. Does it make sense to you? Oh yeah, there's Prabhu here. He's very, very proud, but he's very, very Krishna conscious. So Prabhupada's saying that's a paradox. It's an oxymoron. Because where there is a lot of Krishna consciousness, there'll be a deeper sense of one's own lackings. There'll be a deeper sense of one feeling unqualified to be a devotee. Because that's what humility means. I don't feel qualified to be a devotee. I just feel it's Krishna's mercy that I can be a devotee. Right? You understand? Okay. I'm going to go back to the chat and see what's going on there. Okay, we have some action. So Savitri is asking a question. Can you talk more about realizing that without Krishna I am nothing as a basis for humility? Yeah, this is it's very important, but not difficult to realize. Because, let's say Savitri, let's say you're extremely gifted. Right? We use the word gifted. Like, if you do something and you do it really well, like exceptionally well, then people will say, "Oh, Savitri's gifted," which is kind of interesting, isn't it? Because it's like you're given a gift, a talent, or a specific kind of intelligence, or maybe even some kind of mystical insight. So she's gifted, Savitri's gifted, so who gave the gift? And what is the gift? Well, the gift is that talent, and who gave the gift? So just that statement that Savitri's gifted, if we remember that every ability we have is a gift from Krishna. Just like last night we had kirtan. I've been having kirtan, a lot of kirtan lately. Unfortunately, I didn't know it was going to be televised. But before I forget, around 6:30 on Sunday night, I'll be giving class, and then we're going to do kirtan. So last night we had a nice kirtan, and I was thinking while I was chanting that at any moment I may not be able to chant like this because it's a gift. Krishna's giving me the gift that I can sing. And He could take that away. Maybe my brain could become damaged and I can't hold a tune. Or my vocal cords could become damaged and I'd be crowing like a frog. Or like a coyote. Or like a jackal. Right? So here we are, we're in the material world, and we are completely dependent. We're dependent on food, we're dependent on water, we're dependent on sun, we're dependent on oxygen. So similarly, as we're dependent on these things, we should think that whatever intelligence we have, whatever talents we have, we're also dependent on Krishna for them, for maintaining them, initially giving them and maintaining them and being able to utilize them. So I may do something really well, and I don't think it's wrong to acknowledge that you did something well, but it's wrong to acknowledge where that came from. Because if you acknowledge it came from Krishna, then that's actually a glorification of Krishna. Just like someone could say, "Oh, Savitri, you did a painting and it's so incredible." And in your heart you're thinking, that is a glorification of Krishna because I know that he gave me that ability. So just like Savitri's quoting the verse, I am the ability in man. That Krishna is the